They sent the message while I was still recovering from the hospital bed. Tubes still tangled around my arm like silent apologies no one bothered to give. I had woken up to the sound of a nurse adjusting my foot. And in that groggy state between sleep and pain, I reached for my phone, hoping for warmth. What I saw instead was a single cold sentence glowing on the screen. "We need distance from you. Please stop contacting us completely." There was no punctuation at the end, no name, no explanation, just a collective silence dressed as text. My children, the ones I raised with trembling hands and sleepless eyes, had signed me off like an expired appointment. I read it again, slowly, as if the meaning would change if I blinked hard enough. It didn't. I wasn't surprised, not truly. Disappointed, yes, but I'd been watching the cracks grow beneath the surface for years. Polite indifference at dinner tables, visits that lasted minutes, eyes that scanned rooms instead of mine. The shift had been slow, like frost inching across a window pane, barely noticeable until everything is cold. Still, I held on to the illusion. I kept sending birthday cards, forwarding recipes, asking how they slept, how their children were. My messages were short and kind, bridges made of hope, and they replied at first with words thinner than air, then silence, then this dot. It was winter outside the window, and I remember how the snow looked like peace. But inside, something died that day. Not the love, no, love doesn't just vanish, it hardens, it becomes something else. Something you bury next to the versions of yourself you used to be. I closed the message. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or call them. I just stared at the white ceiling above me and listened to the soft hiss of oxygen beside my bed. The machine cared more than they did. It stayed that. The nurse asked if I needed anything. I smiled and said no. She touched my shoulder gently before leaving, a kindness too small to stitch the wound. But it meant more than anything they had given me in years. I lay there thinking, not of what I had lost, but of what I had given. The birthday parties I paid for, the college tuition I bled to afford, the groceries I delivered when they were too busy, the hospital bills I covered without asking for thanks. And now, this dot, it was their silence that haunted me, not their cruelty. Anyone can lash out, but to vanish, to withdraw love like a loan that expired, that's something only those closest to you can do. They didn't even ask if I was okay. They didn't visit. They just deleted me, like I was a problem to be solved, a noise to be blocked. But I wasn't noise. I was the reason they had a foundation to stand on. I turned my phone face down and closed my eyes. I remembered the lullabies I used to hum to them, the smell of their hair after a bath, their hands in mine when crossing the street. And now, strangers, not even that, strangers at least offer curiosity. My family offered absence. Still, I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply walked away. The house still stood, but it didn't breathe the same. The laughter once soaked into the walls had long since dried into silence. I walked through the front door that had once squeaked joyfully whenever the kids burst through after school, backpacks swinging, voices loud with stories I used to care about. Now, it only creaked like a warning. The carpet no longer held traces of spilled juice or tiny muddy shoes, just dust, waiting for feet that never came home. Every corner of this place was built with tired hands and sleepless nights. My hands, my back, my sacrifice. I remembered the nights I stayed up sanding floorboards, breathing in sawdust, just to save on contractor costs. I remembered arguing with the bank, calculating down to the last penny just so the kids could have their own rooms. And I remembered that first winter, no heating yet, and we huddled together in the living room, under one big blanket. My son had said, "This is like camping, Mom," and I laughed through chattering teeth, pretending it was all part of the fun. That kitchen, I cooked 1,000 meals there. Birthday cakes that leaned to the side but were always devoured. Dinners when the power went out, and we ate by candlelight, making shadow puppets on the wall. My daughter used to sit on the counter, feet dangling, asking why onions made people cry. I used to say, because they're honest. I walked past her old room. The stickers she used to cover her closet were still peeling from the wood. I couldn't bring myself to take them down. They reminded me of her before she learned how to be distant, before she measured every word like currency, and began treating my love like a debt. The fireplace still had the same black scorch mark I never repainted. It happened one Christmas. The boys tried to roast marshmallows indoors. I scolded them, but deep down I had laughed, watching them act like wild men with sticky fingers and soot-smudged faces. That mark became part of the room, a scar, like me, not ugly, just real. The garden out back used to be their playground. Now it's a graveyard of rusted toys. The swing still creaks in the wind, like it's mourning someone. I used to push them for hours, listening to their giggles rise into the trees. And now nothing. The air feels hollow, as if even the trees have forgotten their names. I stood in the hallway and touched the wall where I used to mark their height every year. The lines are still there, pencil scratches of their growing up. They're rising away from me, and I thought I was building something solid. I thought love, consistency, sacrifice. I thought all that would root them. But roots don't matter when the heart no longer remembers the soil. I built this house. I filled it with music, warmth, and mercy. I taught them how to say please and how to apologize. I showed them how to treat people with gentleness, but I forgot to teach them how not to forget. Now, the chairs sit empty at dinner. The clock ticks louder than it used to. Even the floorboards seemed reluctant to echo back my steps. There is no hate in these walls, only memory, and memory can be more painful than rage. This home was once a sanctuary. Now it is a museum of what I gave and what they erased. I stood in the center of the living room, looked around at all the things that used to sing with life, and whispered to no one at all. It used to be filled with love. Now it only remembered me. They never saw the price tags hanging from my love, not because they didn't exist, but because I never let them show. I paid for everything with silence. Sacrifice has a way of disguising itself as routine, and routine becomes invisible. But I remember every cost. I remember the night I went without dinner so my son could have a new pair of cleats for the school team. I remember selling my grandmother's ring, the only heirloom I had, just to pay the deposit from my daughter's first apartment when she moved to the city with wide eyes and trembling hope. I gave them everything, not because they asked, but because they mattered. I was the kind of parent who filled the fridge before my own prescriptions, who stayed up late sewing the torn dress for a school play because we couldn't afford a new one, who clapped the loudest at every mediocre performance, every messy art project, every half-burned birthday cake they attempted as children. My love wasn't poetic. It was practical, heavy, daily. I was there at every graduation, camera in hand, eyes blurred with pride. I remember my son's speech at his university ceremony. He said, "Everything I am, I owe to my upbringing." He never looked at me when he said it, but I held on to those words like gospel. I printed them and taped them to my fridge. Now, years later, I can't bear to read them without shaking. Their weddings were grand, expensive. My son's tuxedo, my daughter's flowers, the down payment for the venue, all paid for with my savings, with the future I had planned for myself but quietly erased. I smiled in every photograph. My hands clutched theirs during speeches. I whispered, "I'm proud of you," into their ears when the music played. But not once did they ask what I needed. Not once did anyone turn to me and say, "Are you okay, Mom?" I was their constant. The one who answered the phone no matter the hour. The one who knew which soup cured which sickness, who remembered birthdays, allergies, and fears. I was the keeper of stories and the fixer of everything broken. But being needed is not the same as being loved. They needed me like they needed running water, only when something wasn't working. And now they texted me to stop contacting them. The betrayal stings not because they turned away, but because I never turned away from them. I gave when I had nothing. I gave when I was tired. I gave when I was grieving, and still showed up with a warm smile and open arms. But there's a truth no one likes to say out loud. Love, when given too freely, becomes expected. They stopped seeing it as a gift. They saw it as a duty. Mine, not theirs. I never wanted repayment. I never asked for thanks. I only wanted presence, time, the smallest gestures, a call, a visit, a sign that I still mattered. But what I received was silence wrapped in entitlement. They didn't even flinch when they erased me. I stood in the attic one night, surrounded by the boxers of their childhood baby clothes, art projects, letters they wrote to Santa. I kept everything. I was their history, but they had no space for me in their present. I realized, as I traced their crayon drawings with trembling fingers, that I hadn't just lost their love, I had lost the meaning of all I had built. And that was the cruelest part. They didn't just take what was mine, they took what I built for them. It started with a strange notification from the bank, a message about an account update I didn't remember making. I almost ignored it, assuming it was some clerical mistake. But something told me to look closer. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was that quiet voice that wakes you up in the middle of the night, when your soul knows something your mind doesn't yet understand. I sat down at the dining table, the same one where we used to eat together, elbow to elbow, laughing between bites. Now it was a place of paperwork and cold coffee. I opened my old metal filing box, the one I kept beneath the sink in a rusted tin, labeled important. I began going through it piece by piece: birth certificates, insurance documents, home deeds. I had always been organized, careful. I trusted paper more than memory. And that saved me. The first thing I noticed was a signature. Mine, but not mine. A loan taken against the house, dated a year ago. A loan I had no memory of signing. The handwriting was close enough to fool a stranger, but not a mother who signed her name on 1,000 permission slips and doctor forms. My daughter had always been good at mimicry. She once forged a note to get out of gym class. I laughed back then. I didn't laugh now. More followed, small withdrawals over time, then larger ones. Funds drained from an emergency savings account I thought untouched. Investments sold, my name removed from certain accounts. All done quietly, precisely, not sloppy, not impulsive. This wasn't desperation. This was planning. They had prepared for my absence before I even knew I was disappearing. I called the lawyer I hadn't spoken to in years, the one who helped draft my will back when I still believed in passing things down out of love. We reviewed the documents together. He went pale. "These changes weren't filed through me," he said. "You never gave these permissions." My will had been altered, certain assets transferred, control given to names I trusted, names that now made my stomach turn. I felt no rage, only clarity, the kind that arrives like frost, cold, undeniable, deadly. I saw now that their betrayal hadn't been an emotional whim. It had been methodical, calculated, done with the kind of precision that requires time and effort. That hurt more than anything, not just that they left me, but that they dismantled my life piece by piece while smiling at me across Sunday dinners. All those moments when they said they were busy, they weren't building their lives, they were tearing down mine. I thought about every sacrifice I had made for them, and I realized now how blind I had been. Love had made me vulnerable, trust had made me exposed, and still, in their eyes, I was just an obstacle, a signature, a gatekeeper to something they believed they deserved. I went through every document that night, from medical files to retirement plans to insurance policies. What I found was a map of betrayal. They had been preparing for my arrest, hoping for my exit, praying perhaps for the day I wouldn't be well enough to notice what they had done. But I did notice, and I wrote everything down, every date, every forged line, every hidden shift in control. I made copies. I made backups. I moved quietly because I knew now, noise is what they expected. Drama is what they feared. But silence is terrifying when it stares back without flinching. I closed the file box and looked around my empty house, no longer broken, just informed. And I whispered to myself, not with sadness, but with steel in my throat. They thought I was weak. They forgot who taught them strength. The betrayal didn't break me. It clarified me. There's a difference. I no longer searched for warmth in their words or apologies in their absence. I began to listen instead, not to what was said, but to what had been missing all along. And in that quiet, something long dormant stirred. Not rage, not even grief, control, cold, deliberate control. I pulled out the leather notebook I hadn't touched in years. It still smelled of cedar and ink. I began writing down everything: dates, withdrawals, copies of altered files, names of people I remembered overhearing in conversation, the ones they thought I was too old to notice. I built a case, not to punish, but to protect what was left. It was no longer about love. It was about reclaiming what was mine. The house was silent, but my mind wasn't. I started waking up early again. Not from pain, but from purpose. I contacted an old friend, Gerald, a retired accountant I hadn't spoken to in a decade. He picked up on the second ring, and after a moment of hesitation, he said, "I always wondered when I'd hear from you again." I met him 2 days later, same corner booth in the cafe downtown. He brought his old briefcase, battered, heavy with the kind of knowledge that doesn't forget. He reviewed everything I'd gathered. As he flipped through the pages, his brow tightened. "This isn't accidental," he muttered. "This is orchestrated. They planned this." I nodded once. I didn't need him to confirm it, but it felt good not to be the only one who saw the truth. Next, I called Eleanor, my lawyer from years ago, a sharp woman with a sharper memory. She had drawn up my original will. When I told her about the changes, the forgery, the siphoned funds, she didn't flinch. She said, "If you're ready, I'll help you take it back." I was ready, but I didn't want firework. I wanted precision. We began to reverse the damage slowly, legally, and without announcement. Trusts were amended, new accounts were opened, powers of attorney were revoked, all silently, beneath their radar. I reclaimed every paper they had twisted, every lock they thought they had changed. By the time they would notice, the door would already be closed to them. I started sleeping again, not the sleep of peace, but the sleep of someone who finally remembered their own worth. I stopped hoping for texts. I stopped rereading old messages. I didn't need them to love me anymore. I needed them to understand that what they tried to erase had roots too deep to be pulled. Each morning, I lit a candle in the kitchen, not out of ritual, but as a quiet reminder, this was still my house, still my name on the deeds, still my story. They tried to rewrite. I sharpened my mind like a blade, not for war, but for protection. Patience became my armor, documents, my shield. People think revenge is a scream, a dramatic confrontation in the rain, but I learned the truth. Real revenge is stillness. It's holding the final card and never showing it until the table is already cleared. They had written me off, but I was just getting started. Revenge is loud only when done by fools. Mine would be silent. It didn't happen all at once. Destruction never does. It begins like a hairline crack in glass, invisible to the eye, but spreading beneath the surface with every careless touch. At first, they didn't even notice the shift. That's the thing about people who are used to taking. They never imagine the well will run dry. My son's business, once bloated with confidence and debt, began to shrink. A client pulled out, then another. I knew, because I still had friends in quiet corners, people who didn't owe me loyalty, but gave it anyway. They whispered about missed payments, bounced checks, a lawsuit filed quietly by a partner who had grown tired of being lied to. The kind of lawsuit that sticks like oil on a white shirt. No matter how much you scrub, the stain remains. My daughter, who once walked through rooms like the world owed her softness, started showing up in community gossip. Not scandal, something worse. Pity. They said her husband was spending nights elsewhere, that the money she bragged about had thinned, that her children were growing cold to her, mirroring the very distance she once aimed at me. And through it all, I said nothing. I didn't need to. Life, it turns out, has an exquisite way of balancing scales. Not always quickly, not always loudly, but always eventually. I'd see them sometimes, not in person, but in digital glimpses, a half-hearted photo uploaded to keep up appearances, eyes dulled, smiles strained. I studied their faces, like old paintings, once bright, now fading. There was a hollowness there I recognized, the same hollowness they left in me. And still, I did not gloat. I simply observed. At night, I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the storm clouds gather across the sky. I thought of their lives built on deceit, entitlement, and short-term gain, now unraveling like threads pulled from an old sweater. Slowly, quietly, irreversibly, they lost more than money. They lost trust. Friends who no longer answered their calls, partners who walked away mid-conversation, even each other, cracks growing between them now that the common target, me, was no longer available to blame. I watched them begin to turn on one another. Guilt is a heavy thing, and when there's no one left to accuse, people start eating themselves from the inside out. I saw my son once at the pharmacy. He didn't see me. He looked thinner, paler. He rubbed his forehead like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. He reached for the same brand of headache medicine I used to keep in my kitchen drawer, the one he never noticed because it was always stocked, always ready, always just there, like me. But I didn't approach him. I simply turned and walked away, my steps silent, my breath steady. The drought had arrived in their lives, and I no longer carried the water. Sometimes, I'd hear their names in passing, from old neighbors, old friends, always followed by a pause, a sigh, a shake of the head. They were learning what it meant to be without a safety net, without someone to clean up behind them, without someone to love them blindly. I wasn't cruel. I didn't wish for their ruin, but I also didn't stop it. That's the difference. I let life do what it does best, reveal truth in layers, slowly, painfully, until even the most arrogant are forced to kneel before it. They thought I disappeared. I was watching from the shadows. It began with a knock, not loud, not frantic, hesitant, as if the sound itself was unsure whether it had the right to exist. I was in the kitchen when I heard it. The kettle had just finished its slow whistle. I turned it off and let the silence fill the space again. Another knock followed, softer this time, almost polite. I didn't rush. I didn't even straighten my sweater. I simply walked to the door, unlatched it, and opened it like one opens an old book they've already read too many times. My daughter stood there. She looked smaller, not in stature, but in spirit. The confidence she once carried like perfume was gone. Her eyes darted nervously, then landed on mine with a kind of practiced sorrow. She didn't say my name, just, "Hi, can I come in?" Her voice cracked on the last word. Not from grief, from exhaustion. That's how desperation sounds when cloaked in manners. Behind her, in the car parked by the curb, I saw a familiar silhouette, my son, staring forward, hands gripping the steering wheel like it might disappear if he let go. He didn't come to the door. He never had the stomach for confrontation, not when he wasn't in control. I stepped aside and let her enter. She looked around the house like a stranger, her eyes tracing memories she had long abandoned. The swing in her glance wasn't nostalgia, it was calculation, measuring warmth, measuring opening. "I heard you weren't well," she said, settling into the chair she once called hers. "We've been worried." The word tasted bitter in the air. I said nothing. I sat across from her, hands folded, waiting. She fumbled. "I know things got complicated, but you're still our mother. We care about you." A pause, a breath, then the real reason cracked through. "And we were going through some things, financially. It's been hard." There it was, the moment when the mask slipped just enough to reveal the hunger beneath. It wasn't a visit, it was a pitch. She reached into her bag and pulled out a framed photo. One of us, from years ago. I hadn't seen it in decades. Me, holding her as a child on her birthday. "Remember this?" she asked, eyes welling with tears she hadn't earned. "We were happy then, we can be again." I studied the photo, not because I missed those days, but because I wanted to remember what I used to believe love looked like. I met her gaze, still, silent. Her hand trembled. The mask was slipping further now. "We didn't mean for things to get so distant. We were overwhelmed. We should have come sooner." She was unraveling, not because of guilt, but because of the vacuum, the space where my forgiveness was supposed to rush in and save her. But I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't offer tea, or touch her hand, or tell her it was okay. She wasn't here for healing. She was here for rescue. And rescue was no longer something I offered. The silence grew heavy. Finally, she whispered, "Can we fix this?" I looked at her, this stranger who wore my daughter's face, and I said softly, "You can speak. I'll listen." And I did. Not to comfort her, not to open my arms again. I listened so I'd never forget the sound of their voices when the foundation cracked, when the lies didn't hold, when the illusion they built on my back began to sink. They thought words could rebuild what they had willingly burned. I let her speak until she ran out of rehearsed lines, and then I stood up and walked her to the door. I didn't hug her. I didn't ask her to come again. I listened. Not to forgive, but to remember their tone. The second time they came together. This time, my son walked up to the door with her. He avoided eye contact, his jaw clenched, the way it used to when he lied as a child. Back then, it was about missing homework. Now, the stakes were measured in signatures and silence. I opened the door without a word and stepped aside. They entered like guests in a house. They forgot how to navigate, eyes scanning the furniture, the walls, the windows, looking for familiarity they no longer had a right to. My daughter clutched her coat too tightly. My son carried a folder, thin, hopeful. He thought he came prepared. I gestured toward the dining table. They sat. I sat across. No small talk, just space and the weight between us. My voice, when I finally spoke, was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes people lean in and regret it. "I received the amended will, the forged one," I said, sliding out a paper from my own folder. "You missed a detail. My original lawyer never stopped storing backups." Their eyes didn't widen, they dropped. I placed another document gently on the table. "Loan applications, submitted under my name, digital footprints traced back to your accounts. Clever enough to fool a stranger, not your mother." Still no sound from them, only shallow breathing. I slid over more. The property transfer attempts. Frozen, reversed. My tone didn't rise, didn't falter, thanks to a good lawyer who doesn't appreciate elder fraud. My daughter opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand, not forcefully. Just enough to remind her that this was not a conversation. "Not yet. I'm not here to shame you. You did that yourselves." I looked at them both. I continued. "You thought I wouldn't notice, that I was too tired, too old, too trusting, and you were right, for a while. I leaned back slightly. But do you know what happens to people like me when we stop hoping? I let the pause linger. We start remembering. My son tried to interject. We didn't mean, you meant every signature, I interrupted softly. You meant every withdrawal, every silence, every day you watched me shrink and said nothing. The quiet roared between us. I pulled out one last envelope, unopened, sealed, official. This is a formal affidavit, prepared, signed, witnessed. It outlines every action taken against me. It's not filed yet, but it can be. I laid it down like a final card on the table. My daughter was crying now, real tears. Maybe, maybe not, I didn't care. You have two choices, I said, my voice still measured, almost tender. We handled this like people who once loved each other, or we let the law handle it like strangers with blood ties. They looked at each other, no words, only shame, only fear. I don't need your money. I don't want revenge. I want acknowledgement, correction, transparency. I held their eyes, one by one. This house, this life, it was built on my back. And if you thought you could bury me quietly, you misunderstood the kind of roots I planted. They nodded, small, broken movements. I stood. We'll start with full restitution. You'll return what you took. You'll sign what you changed. And you'll never assume silence means surrender again. They didn't speak, not yet, but their bodies understood. I walked to the window and let the light touch my face for a moment. Then, calmly, I turned back to them. Let's discuss how you'll make things right. I never raised my voice. I didn't need to. Some reckonings arrive with thunder, others with paperwork. Mine came with notarized apologies and balance sheets written in shame. They agreed to everything not out of repentance, but because there was no path left untouched by consequence. Their fear was no longer of me, but of exposure. My son returned the funds in installments, each one like a confession. He couldn't speak aloud. He avoided my eyes during the transactions, as if numbers could erase what his hands had done. The house was restored to my sole ownership, my accounts unfrozen, my name untangled from the web of lies they had spun. It was not a gift. It was a reversal. And even then, incomplete by Nodder, was made to sign a public acknowledgement, drafted by my lawyer, published in the same newsletter where she once boasted about her rags to riches journey. She called it humiliating. I called it honest. The statement was simple, but every word carried weight. I acknowledge my actions against my mother and the damage caused by them. I accept responsibility and am working toward full restitution. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. There were no apologies with trembling hands or broken voices. They didn't cry at my doorstep again. Instead, they sent emails, polite, detached, carefully worded, apologies that sounded like legal advice, not regret. But I let them come. I let them spell it out, because I wanted it documented. I wanted the evidence of their conscience, even if it was manufactured. And I had conditions clear, binding, a separate account, monitored by a third party, where every payment would land, a legal agreement that voided them from any future claims on my estate. My will was rewritten, witnessed, and sealed. There would be no confusion, no room for revision. What they tried to steal, they would now never inherit. Some would say it was harsh. I say it was clarity. Forgiveness, after all, isn't a door you swing open just because someone knocks. It's a ledger, and mine was long overdue. I didn't ask for their affection. I didn't crave their reconciliation. I only asked for what was fair, and made it legally unavoidable. I walked through the garden the morning after the final document was signed. The swing still moved in the breeze, creaking like old memory. I passed the spot where I used to sit with them on summer nights, telling stories by lantern light. I remembered how they used to look at me like I was their whole world. That version of them is gone. So is the version of me who needed to be needed. They lost more than access to what I owned. They lost the right to rewrite the story. I took it back. Every word, every sentence they tried to cross out. People ask me if I've forgiven them. I smile. Then, I tell them the truth. Mercy isn't free. Forgiveness has an invoice. They wanted to pretend nothing happened, to paint over the cracks. But I made them see every fracture. I made them carry the brush, dip it in truth, and cover the damage one stroke at a time.